City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, Design.
A warm welcome to the American Theater Wing's seminars on working in the theater, now in their 29th year, coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. These seminars offer a rare opportunity to explore with the panelists the realities of working in the theater. This panel is on the stage designers. We will learn how and why these designers became professionals, how they work, how they train, and the reasons for being in the theater. We hope that you will enjoy and learn from today's experiences. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing. And now, let me introduce our moderator for the seminar, the distinguished president of the Rogers and Hammerstein Organization and an active member of the Board of Directors of the American Theater Wing, Mr. Theodore Chapin.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you. Well, carrying on the tradition of distinguished, we have a panel of distinguished designers here today, and I'd like to introduce them to you, starting from my right. Costume designer David Woolard, Robert Jones, costume and set designer, William Ivey Long, costume designer, Tony Walton, costume and scenery designer, Ken Billington, lighting designer, and Thomas Lynch, scenery designer. I'm sure there are some crossovers we'll get to in the conversation. But I thought I'd start by asking the question of when you decided to make the theater into your profession, was being a designer and the kind of designer that you are now the focus that you had first?
Well, I jump right in.
Jump in.
I'm the kid who, in school, turned the lights on and off for the school play. But it was the fourth grade play, believe it or not, and I thought it was so cool turning the lights on and off for the fourth grade play, I decided right then and there I wanted to be a lighting designer. And here we are, a number of years later, I'm doing it, and they pay me now to turn the lights on. Sort of, yeah, sometimes, sort of. So I don't know why. I can't design scenery, I can't design costumes. If you saw me sketch, you would all die. So I just think I did something, I liked it, and followed it.
I remembered recently that as I put something together in a little model that I was doing for a play, I had the sense memory of being about 8 years old and putting a diorama together in a cigar box. I don't know whether you remember doing that for, say, the third grade class. And I was very pleased with my results at age 8 and putting together this diorama, which is a little bit what I do now in terms of making space. But then later I thought that I would go on and into architecture. And when I was in school in the mid-'70s, that seemed like not a great time to be an architect. And I then had, by then, gotten involved in theater and thought, oh no, this is a lot more fun. So I stuck with that.
That's great.
Pretty much the same as Thomas. I thought I'd like to be an architect, and then realised I didn't really want to do that because I had toy theatres, model theatres, all that sort of thing that you do as a child, and puppets, all those sort of things. And then, but I thought, no, what I really want to be is an architect. I want to design buildings. And then actually what I realised was that I was interested in buildings and architecture, not that I wanted to design them. So, and actually being a designer, that's one of the really good things, because we draw upon all those resources all the time. I don't know about, because I'm a set designer as well. I walk around looking at buildings, and I constantly have a sort of a mental notebook of things. And then years later, something will arrive and pop up in a set, and I realise that I saw it 4 years before on a building, in a house, or an office or whatever somewhere else. But being an architect was not a good thing. Pretty similar to what you were saying.
Right. And one thing about architecture, because I did work as a scrub boy down in the blueprint room of an office in college, the point where you start on a project and the point where it's completed is so long. It's a very, very long process. And with theater, you get the pleasure of rather fast. If it's 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or a year, whatever, it's rather fast
But you don't
completion.
have to get the plumbing right.
That's right.
And
In fact, you can
And
get
you
the
really don't.
You could get the plumbing wrong.
Although
for a point.
And then if no one likes it, it all gets pulled down anyway. So it's temporary architecture.
So did you want to be an actor, William?
No, I wanted to be an architect. This is so boring. I did. I wanted to make. I made earlier than the 4th grade. I made little houses of tree trunks, tree roots, and trunk and everything. And I would make imaginary people. This is very telling, Isabel, about my future life. But I would make up stories and write plays and. But then I wanted to be an architect, and I went to school for architecture. And then I went to Yale Drama School and studied with Ming Cho Lee when I realized that I couldn't really use the slide rule. And that was a setback. And then Ming sort of captivated all of us, and we all wanted to be Ming Cho Lee. And then I came to New York, and I was terrible at it. So I started making frocks, as Tony calls them. And sometimes my costumes are so big, I'm told they feel like they're wearing a house. Or they feel like it's architecture. So
Architectural costume.
it's sort of back to the architecture there.
It is all that, though. I mean, I like Ken, started in school, in elementary school, and just I love the way that you could create a world, a place that was from your imagination and just put it out there, and other people would come over and play in it. And I thought that was a really great thing to do. And then later on, I debated if I really wanted to do this, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll become a psychologist, and that's actually where I was heading. And costume design really does everything, because you are a psychologist.
You are a psychologist, yeah.
I mean, it's a fitting room, it's not a sofa. That's the only difference.
It's the classic thing of 25% design, 75% applied psychology.
Exactly.
That's the byword, yeah, and it never changes.
I just want to give Tony an opportunity to answer that, and then we'll go on.
I wish I had gone in as logical a way as everybody here had. But I was planning to be a doctor. My dad was a surgeon, and I just assumed that was where I was headed. And the medically related subjects were the ones I did least well in at school. So I got shifted to a classics remove, in which I was even worse. So to get me out of the way, the classics teacher sent me off to an art school in Oxford. And why he sent me, I have really no idea. I think I did the Debating Society posters, but I hadn't done much else. Anyway, after I went to the art school, neither the art school nor the college was ever quite sure where I was. If I wasn't one, I was just assumed to be at the other. So I had some spare time, and I put on some marionette shows. And they became, starting out with Gilbert and Sullivan, and then through, finally, my big item was Mozart's Magic Flute, about the size of this poster in the pen. And of course, in that scale, you can do pretty fancy lighting, as you can tell. And I was building the marionettes and making the costumes and doing the scenery and singing the part of Papageno.
One-stop shopping.
A fine artist, a very fine artist called John Piper, who is an English, very distinguished artist, who had done the sets and costumes for, I think, all but one of the Benjamin Britten operas, happened to be at one of these performances of Magic Flute and marionettes. And he looked like a medieval figure. He was gaunt, very impressive. And he came backstage and said, "Which one is Walton?" And I went, and he said, "You should do this." And I said, "What is this?" And it turned out he was a visiting teacher at the Slade School of Fine Art in London, and so he sent me there. And to kind of pay my way there, I became an assistant designer at Wimbledon Repertory Theatre, just near the tennis courts. And the two experiences were so completely opposite that was, in a way, the best education I ever had. The Slade School was totally idealistic, didn't even teach you how to do a ground plan or stitch or anything. And the Wimbledon Repertory Theatre was banging the same old bits of scenery into new shapes and slapping a different colour on every week. So trying to mesh those two experiences was the best education I got, I think.
If you couldn't paint it, you didn't design it.
That's right.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the whole notion of the imagination, and how do you take the imagination that you all obviously expressed at an early age and translate some craft into it. What kind of training did you have? I mean, when did the dioramas become drafted? Or
I had, in terms of the dioramas, I actually spent a great deal of time in my childhood, adolescence, and then finally in college, drawing and painting. I did a double major in college, and painting was one of them. And that training and visualization and in being able to put on paper either something that was in my mind or something that I was simply looking at and being very careful about how to get that clearly on paper or on canvas or on the etching plate, which I happen to like. Weirdly enough, I happen to like the process of etching. I don't know why. Printmaking was a very good favorite of mine.
You have to do it backwards, right?
You have to do it backwards, and it's labor-intensive, and it's very technical. And actually, it might be the technical side of that which appeals to my technical nature as well. In any case, I had spent a good deal of time honing those visual skills of visual representation. I had also, like I said, I had been quite serious about architecture and had spent time working in an office, and it wasn't just blueprinting, it was doing model building and so forth, so I had learned some actual skills there, and I had begun to see how you transfer form of ground plan and elevation, section, all of those things that seem sort of boring, how those get put together into form and what that form might mean. With that did go pretty far into design for the theater, only on the visual side. That had really nothing to do with the storytelling side, which was another one of my interests, which was literature, and that was that I had spent also in college. My other major was an English major, and that had to do a lot with interest in basically in stories. And
you're all part of telling stories, so that's
right.
obviously a very, very important
and that
thing.
storytelling and how to do that on stage in spaces. I always say that my design, often one design to another, isn't particularly recognizable. There's not a Tom Lynch style particularly, because I always feel like whatever I do is supporting what the writer's trying to do. So what I feel like I'm trying to do is make a context, an emotional context for whatever story it is, and whether it's one set where something happens or whether it's many sets that have to transfer through space and time, it's about supporting the story. And so it was a marriage of those two things for me. I think for all of us, that's probably exactly how it's gone.
Do any of you feel that there is a William Ivey style or a David Woolard style? Or
I think there is a style. I know we all say we don't want to be pigeonholed, we don't think we have a style, but I think we do, because I find again and again, I set out to do a design, and exactly what Tom's saying, I totally agree, and then by the end of it, if I were to put, say, 6 or 7 designs in a line and look at them, there's always a little line that runs through. Even though we don't like to say we've got a style, I think we all do.
Well, the harder you try to avoid
Yeah.
having a style, the more your limitations kind of force one on you. It's whatever your drawbacks are end up being what your style inevitably turns up. People assume William has
They
a style.
assume I have a style. Well, I'm gonna. I don't know. This is just going to encourage him, but John Simon once. You know how we memorize our bad reviews?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And did
No.
you do that?
Oh, yeah.
You're not supposed to read them.
Yeah, I do read them, every one of them. I memorize them, read them backwards. I etch them. He once wrote, and this was years ago, and I have never disappointed him, I think. He said, William Ivey Long hovers. The costumes by William Ivey Long hover between taste and travesty. And I think that can be on my tombstone. Because everything hovers between taste. So that's the style. It hovers between taste and travesty. Other than that, I don't think so. I like a certain red. Tony and I fight over the color red all the time. Mine is a blue red. Tony's is
Well, then it's
other
always
red.
my problem to make it look like the red.
That-
So
that-
you
yeah,
want
yeah,
it
that's right.
held out in the sunlight and the
So you
lighting
can always tell
changed.
who's connected with the show, because Tony has a red and I have another red.
But to be fair, for example, in 6 Degrees of Separation at Lincoln Center, Greg Mosher, who was then in command, said William would probably not be appropriate on account of his taste versus travesty tendencies, and these were all supposed to be real people in real clothes and not costumes, and we all said, but William can do that, and they all said no, no, and he indeed proved he could,
Tony
and frequently
defended
does.
me.
Yes.
Well, you know, I was coming with style. We all work all over the place, you know. But we all do Broadway shows. We do off-Broadway shows, opera. Tony does film. I do television, spectaculars, Las Vegas acts, and they are all so wildly different. You know, making Shirley MacLaine look good on the stage at Caesar's Palace is very different than trying to do Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway, or making the Rockettes do something. So that makes us work harder to come up with a style for where we're working, and it makes me think a lot. There's nothing that comes easy, and I just can't say, oh, I know how to do this. I do know how to do it, but you stop and say, well, wait a minute, I have to deal with the blonde hair on this person for backlight, and so the style has to change, I think, for where you're working, even though we all do have a style. That just contradicted everything.
I want to talk a little bit about collaboration, because part of what's going on here is the sort of the sense of collaboration, and there are members of this panel who have worked together from time to
I
time.
worked with all of them.
Well, he's the classic.
There may be just one thing to add
Yeah.
about style, which is because of what tends to get reproduced. You see designs for the theatre by Chagall or Picasso, or famous painters who have worked in the theatre, and they, of course, design in the style of Chagall or Picasso. And so there's a kind of
Which
assumption.
is why they're asked to do
That's
those
right.
particular pieces.
Mhm.
Right.
And so people assume that that's kind of a necessary part of what we do, but I think you'll have gathered from all of us, at least, that it's the last thing we want of ourselves. We want to try to be the eyes of the author, if we can, via the sensibility of the director. And sometimes, even though we're all visual people, I know in my case, in order to try and avoid my own personal taste or style leaking in too strongly, I try initially to read the script as if it's a radio play. I try to keep all imagery out until I have a chance to meet with the director or the author or both. Because if you have a rush of images and they don't happen to jibe with the image that your director may have, then it's sometimes harder to let go of something you fell in love with when you first read the script than it is to just wait and let whatever the director and
Or,
writer
Tony,
feels.
along the same line, if you come in too strong in a first or second meeting with a director, with a visual idea, the director may be so cowed by, oh my goodness,
Yes.
Tony Walton who's so fabulous at visualizing things, may have this idea, and of course I have to go with that, and he's not thinking quite
Yeah, that's right.
clearly enough yet on his own about the visual,
Yeah.
and he will sort of accede to that, and then find that there are problems
Yeah.
with what he wants to do, and then you're in a little bit of a
That's
mess.
true. It's a very slow process, and
You have to
hopefully
give
you're all trying
you
to
have to
slowly
give
come towards the
room
same
for that. Right?
Have you had,
Same piece.
it's only happened to me twice in my career, but where I met with the director and the author and was so totally opposite from what they were thinking, I didn't take the job.
Yes, yeah.
Because I just said, I probably could have done it, but it was just so against
Yes.
what I
I've
thought
done-
the
that's
play
it,
was
that's how
about.
I've done it.
Yes.
You know, I
Absolutely.
can't.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
a good clue is their body language. You should, in the meeting, you know, I mean, we costume designers, of course, live on body language, or we should, and the language of everything. And some meetings just become, you can watch that they react to you, and they end up sort of falling, you know, sort of like this, and take their glasses down, anything but dealing with you, because they can tell they hate you. And the same thing is, as I watch myself contort to them, and that's usually a good rule of thumb. If you're contorted totally at the end of the meeting,
And you know you should go away from it.
absolutely
never gonna
watch your contortions and watch their contortions.
But I imagine part of the fun would be if you have an idea that is different than the director's, you want to win the director over to your idea.
Whose life is too short.
That's quite exciting. And that's about collaboration as well, because I think that we bring, I mean, as far as style and whatnot goes, I mean, we all have our own histories that we, no matter what, we're going to bring to the table. And in
not that you want to, as Tom is saying, plow them over with this idea of yours, but you also do want to bring something informative so that you can be a part of the growing nature of that or the collaboration of that, rather than just, it's going to be, this is what we're going to do, I feel.
It's similar for an actor, though, really. How much of this is me, and how much of this is not me? And we're all doing the same thing. We're all trying to find what is special about this particular creature that we're working on. And the things that appear to work best are the ones where you can hardly figure out who came up with what.
It's the classic question, and people often ask the question of a designer, who came up with that idea?
Yeah.
And when you can say, I don't know, I always think that's a really good sign of collaboration.
Yes, yeah.
What I think
that's a good answer.
Politically, a good answer, yes.
Yeah, but
I don't
also-
know, I think it was the director.
But often,
Oh, I'm sure.
What I don't know if a lot of our audience, we work on new projects all the time, and when we get the script, there is no ground plan in the back of it. There are no, and sometimes there is not even description other than there's a door up center and a staircase, and we, not so much me because I do lights, but we have to conceive what the space is going to be, what it's going to look like. Then it's published that way, and when it's done in community theater colleges around the world, they always sort of open the script to the back and look at the picture and the ground plan and say, oh, there's a door down right. And the door down right might be the simple reason that was the only way to get to the dressing rooms in that theater.
It's also interesting, sorry, that the scenic descriptions, and maybe the costume descriptions, I'm not sure, in, say, the French's acting editions, are generally speaking not written by the author. They're usually written by the production and stage manager for the show, in between,
After the
fact. They just describe what the production looked like. And that's interesting. I've worked a few times with David Rabe, who has never put a stage direction of any sort in his first scripts. But by the time they're published, there's a full description of the environment. And
it's also pretty interesting with musicals, where it's not one environment, but many between whatever it is, 5, 10, 15, 20 places, and how you get from one to another. By the time that's published, it seems, in the published form, as if there's a very logical way that those have gone. Those, of course, reflect how that original production ended up after a lot of angst and struggle and torture.
That script thinking, oh, well, they've just designed it along,
Well, it's when they're staging it and they don't have any scene change music, and they say, how did they get from scene 1 to scene 2? Well, the lights went from left to right, or whatever it was, but it's...
Well, the crazy example is reading the first draft of 6 Degrees of Separation that Tony and I worked on. And it was written as a screenplay, and of course it was later turned into a film. And there was no place, remember, no time, no place, no time of day. And Tony and
well, there were a lot of descriptions within the dialogue of whether, I think, as I remember, there were about 35 requirements of different places: a living room, a bedroom, a
but
kitchen,
it went like that,
Central Park.
And you thought, wait a minute.
Movie theater, on and on, yes.
So Tony and Jerry worked that out and tried to, and a lot of it was still worked out in the rehearsal, like when people would just all of a sudden stand up in the audience and start talking, because that was not a place, that was sort of a tangential.
Well, that was kind of just one of those lucky events that, as William said, there were all these different locations, and we feared that we would be sitting there all night waiting for the kitchen to come trucking on.
And the tree gobo to come up to the stage.
And I had many sleepless nights about it, and then finally asked Jerry if we could just start with nothing. If he could just see what can you not do without. And he said, all I know is I need a place to sit down. So we started with one sofa. And we didn't get much beyond that. We ended up with two sofas.
That was
and a trolley and a kind of a red circus ring stage. And one of the problems was, what are we going to do about entrances and exits? And I'd just been working on Tommy Tune's production of Grand Hotel. And in the rehearsal period of that, which was done in a derelict old ballroom just off Broadway, the cast sat around the stage on benches until the moment came for them to become involved in the action. And it was very interesting because you could also see them watching the other actors before they came in to take on their own scene. So just because I'd been watching that, I said to Jerry, what about if we do that? How about if all of our cast sit in the front row or the front 2 rows of the theatre, and they have programs as if they're members of the audience? And, as I remember it, he and John Webb were horrified at this idea. But because Jerry's a fine director, he woke me up in the middle of the night, a few nights later, and said, I got it! I can just see the detective stand up and say, do you want to press charges? And if they say no, he can sit right down. He doesn't have to even get on the stage. And of course, then he took that and ran with it. But sometimes the physical nature of a production can come from something as peculiar as that. We need to move like an express train. How can we get the actors to be in the action at the speed of light? There's no time for them to open a door. So that was where we started on that production.
But that's a wonderfully trusting story of 2 people. I mean, you know, a director and a designer who obviously are willing to listen to each other.
Yes.
So you were pushing each other.
And they really did just start without a finished
Nothing,
plan.
yes.
That
Yeah.
was what extraordinary to me.
Yeah.
So I just started making collages, thinking, well, on this page is something we'll use, maybe.
Well, one of the things that was kind of interesting in terms of the collaboration is I said the only thing I sort of know, and this is only a gut feeling, is that this is all happening out of red. The circus ring is a very, very powerful red. And William went, oh my God, as he usually does
Yeah,
whenever
I
we started.
usually
But what am I going to do? What can I
It's
possibly
his
use?
red, not mine.
So, yeah.
So your reds work together? Or
No.
No.
No, they have an attack when they meet each other. Ours.
So we got a big piece of carpet of this particular red, and the lighting designer, Paul Galler, joined us. This is before rehearsals had started. We went to one of the theatres that we were working in and laid the carpet down and put different color lights on, and William just threw fabrics.
I threw fabric.
Ah! Oh, ooh.
Also, there was a painting mentioned in the script that was a Kandinsky, and so
Double-sided.
double-sided, famous now, yes, double-sided Kandinsky, and I sort of took in the end, when in doubt, go back to the Kandinsky and pull a color out, because it's pretty much worked.
When you design a set for the theater, do you design it for a large theater or a small theater? Do you have to, before it goes in, decide what size theater that you're going into?
Ideally, you have to know, but many times you don't, and that's very tough.
And what happens with the costumes? Difference in a large theater or a small theater?
Sometimes you're really designing for where the director is sitting in the 10th row. Let's be truthful. And the level of detail, I think, these days, the cinema there's a symbiotic relationship between films and the stage that's creeping in more and more, I think. And so the more real a detail that the director and playwright can see, it used to be that for a big house, you'd put a big trim right around here.
The bar really has been raised on that, about what we're seeing as real, and we're seeing it. We're needing to see real.
More
Our
real
eyes are
than
needing to see
when
real.
even I started out.
Right.
And because you could put like a nice piece of black rickrack around here, and you'd see that collar better if it was a big old house. So
I think the same is true
now
of
it's
props as well. Don't you find that, Tony, that any kind of prop you have on stage, you can't have just any old chair or just any old ashtray or just any old tiny little piece of something. We've gotten so attuned to looking rather closely at exactly what that is that it has to be quite exact. And also, funnily enough, actors have become more and more and more demanding.
They won't work with a prop that doesn't look exactly
even if
right.
we can't see it, the audience, the
happens a lot.
actor has a very real need, and I respect that. It's their work. They have a very real need to have the thing very telling to them in the moment as well.
Why
And
do you
more
think
and
that's
more they
happened?
want it. Sorry,
No.
I was saying more and more they need it in the rehearsal room. During the
Yeah, I
rehearsal
think it's
process.
because of their
Don't give them a
TV. I think it's
rehearsal
because
code
of
you
their.
don't
That's the
see on
problem.
that.
You know,
Exactly.
you can rehearse for 6 weeks on not quite the right furniture, and you get
And
into
then
the
it
theatre
throws
and
them
it's
off the
all
night.
right.
Yes,
And you always go back to some tatty old sofa that they've had
Yeah,
in the
but they've
rehearsal
been
and
using
recover
so-
it and make it work. or
I
whatever,
think
but-
that is because of the both their TV and movie work,
Yeah.
where they're so used to having the
Touching
very
everything.
the very
Yeah, and it's
thing.
very important.
And it's very very important.
But then there's also that comfort level that the actors like. Bebe Neuwirth, we did Chicago, and Bebe's, every time she comes back to the show, which gloriously she does from time to time, we drag out this same old chair that she did that chair ballet with, and it was spray painted in the alley, and it's worn off in the center, so you see the brown. And every time people go, oh, well, can't you? No, she won't have it touched, apart from the superstition.
Yeah.
But that's literally the first rehearsal chair that she used.
And some of that comes
brought
from the
back.
director. I mean, that was Fosse, and I, as you know, worked a lot with Fosse, and he, particularly in film, but sometimes in theatre too, was very insistent, having been a performer himself, that everything that you provide for the performer should be supportive of what they need to be thinking at any given moment. If they open a drawer and there's a piece of mail in there, or it has to be a piece of mail addressed to that character with a message that would be appropriate. Nobody, of course, can see it except for the actor, but it was crucial to him that you took that kind of detail. And in some instances, and I don't know if you do the same thing, but in movies, I do try to do things that will make an actor feel something about the nature of his role. For example, Albert Finney in Murder on the Orient Express as Inspector Poirot. I had not only monogrammed cufflinks and cane, but I made him a ring out of a bullet casing because he was supposedly injured in the hip in the First World War, and this was a reminder that he should limp. Because the ring, if you make it out of the brass bullet casing, it leaves a rather nasty little green ring. So he was always conscious that he was wounded when he was...
Well, our colleague, Santo Loquasto, who's not with us at the moment, but I'll tell a good little tale on him. He always, when there's a hallway leading to the stage, I know most of you probably do this too, but I always go backstage to see Santo's sets, because once you get near the stage, he starts the carpeting, so you can feel that feel. And there are pictures on the wall that only the actors can see. And of course, that's just delicious for them. They love that.
You know, going back to what you were saying about size of the theater, in the world of lighting, the bigger the room, the brighter the lighting. So in a small 99-seat theater, you can put a light at a very low level and everybody can see everything. If I did that in a Broadway theater, nobody would see anything. And then you get into the 2,000-seat theaters, I'd be fired. So even though it may be the same play in the same surroundings, the lighting just keeps going up and up and up and brighter. So I know when we work at Radio City, when we do the shows there, the production table where we light the show from is in the 10th row. And the director's always saying, well, make it a little bit darker. And I always get the director up, walk them a half a city block back and say, there are 3,000 people sitting behind us. And he'll say, oh, it's not bright enough. So you have to be very aware of, I do at least, of the size of the venues you're playing.
Now, has it been lighting designers who have caused Broadway theaters to hang trusses?
No,
because there are now many, you look at the beautiful ornate...
the front of the house.
You know what it is? It's the public. It's the public. If you look back at Joe Melziner's original light platform, Guys and Dolls, out front, total out front, there were 24 500-watt lights lighting all of Guys and Dolls and 3 follow spots.
From the front?
From the
front
front,
of the house.
in front of the proscenium. On a typical musical now, 250 lights out front would... There are 575, but the lights have been redesigned. But that many lights, plus the 3 follow spots, and I still get notes that it isn't bright enough. And the audience, it goes right into sound. I think television and concerts
and also hearing.
Our awareness of the world around us has changed. Before we had television and before we had concerts, people would go to the theater and they would accept that. Now they won't. They're used to, if you watch a television show, the old Ed Sullivan show from the 50s, they rarely did a camera cut. You'd see somebody doing whatever they were doing and the camera stayed on them. Now you watch a variety show today, there's 20 cuts in that one song. It's the same thing, I think, that has happened to us, is we've just had to compensate for the audience not seeing as well. Or
hearing as well.
And not hearing as well. And they
not
always
wanting to work quite as hard.
not work as hard. I mean, it's always, people laugh, if you can't see it, you can't hear it. And though we laugh at that,
I think it's true.
I think it's true.
Absolutely.
I'm always, it's really bad when you're doing a flop comedy. When when nobody's laughing at the bad jokes, the lighting just gets brighter and
the sound goes up and up.
And change the dress.
Change the dress, and then the sofa. How many sofas have you seen?
Sofas.
And then the toilet flushes. When you hear toilet flushes, you know it's a flop.
But do you anticipate that? Do you just like eke the lights up in
you
anticipation?
start down here because you know that
You've got to
2
get
weeks
somewhere
from
to
now,
go,
you're going to
yeah.
be up there. So if you start there, you don't have any place to go.
Is it fair to say that something else that has happened, though, is that many more productions now are thrust out into the audience to some degree, so you literally cannot light them from behind the proscenium.
Right.
So you need more equipment out front just to get people out on the floor.
Everyone wants to see a film. They come to
Right,
the theater and want to see a movie.
It's a movie mentality.
And they want everything to move quickly, quickly. Get that clothes on. Da, 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 da. What do you mean it takes a minute to change? You know, seconds.
And that has
the
to
scenery
do,
has to dance.
and that
do
has to
choreography.
do with plays as well as musicals.
Oh,
most
yes. Everything has
most
to be a
new
film.
plays
Cut in,
that I
cut out.
get, and we all get new plays all the time. It's very rare that I get a new play that is a single set play. Whenever I do, I go, hallelujah, here's a single set play. Here's a room. Normally, it's many, many places, and it's because our writers are, I think,
They write for TV and movies.
they're very, very accustomed to telling a story through many locations and having their characters move through many locations, and therefore we need to see many locations. I
was going
to say, it's slightly our fault in being so clever
Well,
that
no,
we can
I think
actually
we encourage it.
that we can actually do it.
Yeah.
That we can actually go through the gyrations to make that happen.
Yeah.
For instance, with 6 degrees, making all of those needs evaporate was a very, very good thing because it meant that we could focus on that story. Another example of something from around that same time that I did was Wendy Wasserstein's Heidi Chronicles, which was, I think, 14 non-repeating locations. And that story really had each of the scenes within that story just went right there, stayed there for 7 minutes, went to the next one, stayed for 10 minutes, went to the next, stayed for 6 minutes. And they really had to be in those locations or they didn't make sense. So the need to get to those locations was extreme. And we got there by a lot of stagecraft. And the costume changes, I remember Joan Allen having to do a costume change in something like 30 seconds on a moving platform that was moving at 5 feet a second, and a screen was coming in, and projections were happening, and then 15 seconds later, there she was in a new costume. And the poor girl, you thought, wait a minute.
And she has to talk, too.
Is this acting? Right, is this acting, or is it a trapeze act?
Yes.
You know, it's pushing the actor as well as the designers to a point you kind of question, finally.
But it is also it's a kind of liberation that's happened for the playwrights, that they don't feel obliged to
go for unity.
To go for a single setting, yeah. And it's produced, 6 Degrees is a good example, it's produced very imaginative ways of
Well,
playwriting.
don't you think dramaturgs could very clearly explain the difference in the musical being done today and say Guys and Dolls, where they were in one production numbers so that the drop could come in and they could change the scenery, and then it would go up, then there'd be a full stage number, and then drop down, and that's the way the play was, the musical was written, and now they're written with
seamlessly.
all
Yes.
is possible.
Yeah.
So I think
on the original
that can be traced.
Original New York production of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, Mike Nichols, who directed it, was very keen that it shouldn't. The London production was somewhat stylized, a lot of black screens, and Mike felt that the New York audience needed to know more about these British characters, and therefore their environment needed to tell us more about them. So there were a large number of scene changes. I think it was about 11, and he said the only caution I have to give you is that none of these are in one. They're all full sets. And I don't want to wait more than 4 seconds between each one. So we had a lot of things revolving. And
But
you solved it.
But finally, Tony, that was actually, what is odd about that, it was rather, that was thrilling. Your results were thrilling. And it worked very well. And also with Wendy's play, finally, what was there on stage, it worked. The play, I think, was served very, very well. And the writing, I think, was served very, very well.
Yes.
So it's...
But you do feel that thing for the actor, where all these things are turning and twisting. And we had one actor, Ken Welch, who just forever went through the walls, trying to find himself in the right room.
Right.
So you see
for them.
these as things that inspire your
Challenges.
imagination
They're
to come up with
challenges.
this.
They're challenges, yeah.
Oh, we love solving them. Susan Stroman is always throwing dresses at me that have to change mid-dance into another dress.
Or William
And
and I are doing a show right now called Thou Shalt Not, and one of the things that William has had happen is that there's an entire wig change, like in a second on stage that we don't see.
That you don't see. She ages. She has a stroke, poor Deb Mott.
And within a second, and we don't see it, she's completely changed. I still haven't figured out how
I'm
that
not going to
happens.
tell you.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And it's not done with lighting.
It's for the book.
It's for the book. I wanted to ask about when you, as a designer, create something that is completely fanciful, that is obviously, you talked about the architecture inspiring a set and stuff like that. Because I confess that the first set that I ever saw that just blew me away as something that was a complete world of its own was the original production of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And I remember saying to Tony, there's something weird about this, because it's sort of a street, and yet there's nothing, and the buildings don't look right. They all look like they're sort of wrong, and the costumes are sort of mohair, but they sort of look like they don't know what they are. And I was absolutely captivated, because it all seemed like a world of complete fantasy. Is that something which is fun to do? Do you get opportunities to do that, or was that a one-shot?
Well, it came about through my getting peculiarly scrambled, because the original director was Jerry Robbins, and then he left in pre-production, and George Abbott came in just very shortly before rehearsals. But he had been planning to go on vacation, so I met him in order to just be interviewed, and he accepted me for the job. And then I said, should I send you things, or can I bring you stuff down to Florida? He was going to Florida to golf and dance. He was very big on, as you probably know, ballroom dancing. And he said, no, I'm going to be on my vacation. I said, well, could I send you stuff to get some feedback? He said, no, it's my vacation. He was 70 then. I thought the oldest person I ever expected to work with, and as probably most of you know, at 105 he was still working. And at the opening night of Damn Yankees, when a journalist said, what's been the biggest change in the theater since you started out? He said, oh, electricity, I think. At any rate, he had been at it long enough to know that he didn't want to waste a lot of time with his designer, and so I didn't really have anybody to speak to. And I said, well, when will you see this? He said, I'll see it on the first day of rehearsal when the rest of the company does. It'll be good for me. I like a lot of emphasis in that. So I asked Hal Prince about it. He was the producer, and he said, I know you're kind of on your own. And so I just tried to imagine. I'd been going a certain route with Jerry Robbins, and then I tried to imagine what the kind of baggy pants George Abbott version might be like. But it was my first Broadway musical. I'd done a couple off-Broadway, but this was my first sort of big chance. So I thought I would be stupid not to put in at least the 7 Hills of Rome and everything else that would really make an impression. So on one hand, I was doing this little sloppy cardboard knockabout burlesque thing, which I thought would be right for Abbott. And on the other, I was making this, what to me, rather impressive mini model with all these little buildings, and just strictly to impress. And because Abbott wasn't available, I asked Mike Nichols, who was then in Nichols and May on Broadway, an evening with Mike Nichols and May, whatever it was, because he was clearly the kind of guiding force of their extraordinary routines. And he came and he looked at these two things for the longest time. I was just in agony. He didn't say anything for the longest time. And he kept going back to this very detailed one, and then you just quickly look at this little rubbishy thing. And then finally he got up and he walked over to the rubbishy thing and he said, you know, that doesn't remind me of anything. I bet that's right. And sometimes that is a really good signal. If you sort of discover en route that what you're doing doesn't particularly remind you of anything you've done before or anybody else has done, then maybe it just belongs to this particular piece, and that's very lucky if that happens.
Did you have a similar circumstance when you took over Seussical? There's a world that had to be created.
Aren't you evil?
Well, no.
You are so mean. Well,
next subject.
We should pass on that.
Okay.
David.
Put me right
Oh,
after.
right after the mention of
You know, as Tony was saying about working with the directors, I've done a great number of shows with Hal Prince, and Hal Prince totally lets his designers go forward. He'll throw some ideas out. I know when we did Sweeney Todd, he threw Eugene and I a picture of the light coming through windows at Penn Station. He said, go think about this, guys. And out of that came the set for Sweeney Todd. He knows what he needs and if there's any specifics, but I always find that sort of thrilling that they will take it. And then there's many meetings after that, and you go through all that. But that first impression that he says, that's why he hired us, is to come up with some very clear ideas and our concept of the shows. And that has always been sort of thrilling.
He also says it's hard for him to work on the material itself until he has the visual metaphor for the show. That whatever the designers bring him gives him his sense of direction on what, how, to whatever degree he may have shaped that himself. It gives him something to start working on for the piece itself.
How broad can those metaphors be? I mean, I know that Bells Are Ringing was clearly television, 50s television, which was kind of, that's sort of what you're talking about. Here it is. But how broad, I mean, a category, can it be an artist? You said earlier that Chagall, can that be one of those metaphors, or is that something else?
It's so tricky because they still want to have buttons if you see them buttoning, and they still want to have, shoes. And for clothing, you get really caught in those metaphors. Damn you for this.
It's a little bit like that.
You really get
yes,
caught.
William, you're right.
The stronger
it's a little bit
metaphor.
different for scenery because you can be broader with a metaphorical space or a metaphorical idea that human beings, and we still think they might be human beings in those clothes with the buttons,
You can also
exist
be pretty
in.
reductive, which you can't be that much with costumes.
With costumes,
No,
you really
comes
can
back.
be.
You can at your peril.
You
but if
can't
you're trained
actually
to do
closer
it,
it
it
gets-
can't be done.
The closer it gets to your mouth, the more realistic it has to
That's
There you
right.
go. Right around here, I think.
And
Yeah.
with scenery, you actually can be reductive or minimalist, or even go slightly counter to what's happening with costumes.
But the more that happens, the more we focus down onto the actor and their character. And
Right.
everyone starts homing in on all that detail, so it's over to the
And you
costume
get notes
designer
about
to
those
solve
buttons.
Exactly.
Right,
yeah.
Although
I
Is
do.
it fair to say that there is still a bit of a difference, though, between stage costumes and movie costumes? In that,
Less and less, I feel.
But you don't.
Because
In that, for a
less and
movie,
less.
you're very seldom aware of the full silhouette. You're much more conscious
Exactly.
of
In
that.
fact,
But you can in the theater tell something about a character with the full
Well, you
silhouette.
get the whole game. You have
Yeah.
the shoes, the socks, all the way up to the hat and the perfume.
The shoes are
in the
very
film.
few and far between on
Yes.
film. That's why they always like to wear their old scuffy things until
Absolutely.
they know
In
that
film,
they're going
you
to be
start
in
with
the
the
shot.
earrings.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I mean,
Of all the craftsmen that are here, the better you do your job, the least it's seen by the audience.
You hope.
And I think that's very interesting. Lillian just said that she stopped working on the stage when they stopped having footlights. She said that was the only way to really light a person from the ground up. Do you still feel that way?
I use footlights
I love
all the
footlights.
time.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
I'm one of the
They're
few
terrific.
designers that
Right.
uses them all the time. Even on Chicago, I have
Yes, you have
like
footlights.
4 shows out now with footlights. They're great for, besides making actors look good, they're good for they're great for making the scenery look good. If you have a painted show, if you have,
But they also bring the energy to the
and it's
performer.
this way,
because
and
it
it's
warms them up.
theatrical.
Literally, their curtain
How do
warmers.
you use footlights? You said you still do.
I use them. I put them usually always. Here we go with style in the same 3 colors: pink, lavender, and blue. Because the pink can make the ladies look lovely. The lavender can probably make the scenery look good, and the blue, in case you get into trouble. So,
And then you can mix them all.
and they work. I know when I used to work with Mary Martin a lot, and the first show I did with her, she walked on stage, and as she made her entrance, the footlights came up. And she walked on stage, walked dead center, and looked at me and said, "Thank you, Ken." And she knew that footlights, they erase a lot of shadows under the chin. Sometimes they're good for making people not fall off the edge of the stage, too. I mean, there's not
But
Otherwise,
there's
it's
actually
another
also a
big white
sense,
line,
I think
isn't
there's
it?
even more than that. That is true, and they do make the scenery. They do help the scenery. They take a lot of wrinkles out of a lot of drops. But there's also a
Drops,
relationship
chins.
between the audience and what's happening on stage, that footlight look is so kind of theatery, and you think, oh my God, I'm in a theater now. I'm not just in a place with some old light hanging around. It feels very warm. It usually makes for an inviting moment, and it is actually a very useful old convention. That
I love doing curtain warmers, which is what you see when you walk into the theater, of you putting footlights in. And I have done it on a few shows where that's all they're used for, in fact, is the curtain warmers. We have footlights for the curtain warmers because isn't that what we think curtains look like? You know, and if you can make the people look good, that's even
Is this
better.
something you've brought back? Did they go out of fashion entirely?
Well,
they
if
were
you
out of
go to
fashion,
any new
absolutely.
performing arts center, when you want to put footlights on, they have to start drilling into their beautiful concrete front of the stage.
But it was also as the stage began to thrust out more. If you put footlights, members of the audience are looking into the footlights. In fact, actually, I worked with Lillian Gish in 1972, I think, on Uncle Vanya, in which, because it was in the circle and the square, there couldn't be any footlights. And she was a little unhappy about it, I must say. She was also unhappy that she wasn't playing Eliana in her 20s. And she had a wonderfully selective memory, I must say, when she came to her first costume fitting. She said, this is going to be very strange for me, because you see, I've always designed my own costumes. No, wait. Not in Birth of a Nation. My mother designed those.
And you know, we also have to deal with those personalities. I remember when I worked with Ethel Merman. Ethel Merman had in her contract the color pink that had to be in the follow spot to make her look good.
She was right.
Now, the color pink that she liked was closer to magenta and made her look grotesque, but it took a lot of cajoling to get her to try the pink I wanted to use, because those old broads knew a lot about the theater, and they knew how to make themselves look good. And I think that came from years of doing stock and touring and all of that, that if they didn't bring their gels, I know Tula Bankhead used to tour her own gel.
Traveled with her gels.
For the color, so when she could play there. So
It's a great idea. Here are my gels. Come in. Where's my dressing room? Here are my lights.
Here are my
Did you
gels.
ever have a leading lady who had in her contract that every time she set foot on stage, the lighting had to increase by 3 points?
Oh, I've done that a few times.
Yes, well, that's actually been in the contract.
I didn't know it was in the contract.
And it works. And it was a wonderful old English performer.
Who was
called
that?
Dame Cicely Courtnidge. And she had that in her contract. And in fact, the reviews said every time she sets foot on stage, the whole stage seems to light up.
Oh, lovely.
I don't think John Simon wrote
It's
that.
like magic.
Well, I know when I did a show with Claudette Colbert, and it was a terrible play, but we were doing it, and she spent a lot of time in a wheelchair at a desk. And we walked into the theater one day, and it was always Miss Colbert and Mr. Billington. And she came in, and she had her dresser, who had been with her for 50 years, and she came and she sat at the desk, and she said, Mr. Billington, would you put the lighting as we have it when I sit at the desk? And I said, well, certainly, and I put the light cue in, and she turned to her dresser, who handed her a mirror this big, and she sat at the desk and went like that, and looked, and she said, very good, Mr. Billington, and she went back to her dressing room.
Do you find costume designers that you have to cajole occasionally, and a reluctant actress?
What?
I have to get back from the last question I asked.
Yeah, you do.
Is that a good one?
Cajole? I wouldn't say cajole. Oof, you really, that could be an entire seminar right there.
It's parenting, isn't
It's
it?
nanny.
No, but
Well, a lot of times
Yeah.
they have a perception of what they feel makes them look their best, and I
They're
think
not
that
always right, though.
a lot of times they are right, but sometimes
And then you have to listen when they're
Yeah,
right.
you
you
ignore
always
it
have
at
to
your
listen. No
parents.
matter what.
Oh,
You
don't
always
ignore
have
it.
to listen because there's something in there, even if they're wrong.
But it's
There's
based on something.
It's based on something,
Some
and you have to
childhood memory,
find
something.
that.
But I
Their
think
mother
it-
saying their ears were too big.
Exactly.
But
Anything.
it's at its worst when you do contemporary clothes,
Yeah.
because then personal taste comes into it. I'd never wear that. I'd never wear
Right.
that colour. I wouldn't do this.
Oxymoron. Right.
When it's a period piece, they're almost sort of willing. They trust the designer more.
Right,
I
because
think.
they
Think, well, you know better, so you'll make me look good anyway. Whereas when it's contemporary things,
Right.
they've got far more to say, and it's much
Exactly.
more difficult.
One of your fellow designers told us that when she had people come, even the chorus girls, for a fitting, she had silk underwear for them to put on. to make them feel that they were something very special
Is this
about
Theone?
being in the theater. Who was it?
Was it Theone, I think?
Yeah.
I think it might have been Theo.
We learned from her. I try to have them there too.
Producers so want to do that. too.
Yeah, exactly. But we do it. We do
Does it work?
Of course it works. Of course it works. And you have apples and grapes and water and
Exactly.
oh, absolutely.
I like
The
it. I was
performers
just like the
are
end of it.
very vulnerable,
I like it.
particularly at their first fittings, because it's the first time that they see themselves as this character in the mirror. And as the guy said, is you do really have to function somewhat as a nanny, as some sort of a guide to help them through the shock of this. It's very different for dancers, because most dancers are pretty amazing looking to begin with, and they're used to being told what to do. So they tend to be thrilled with no matter what you put on them, and they always look great. So
It's
that's a
very-
bit-
There are 2 points of, one, I mean, it's not often that you're saying, hello, how are you, take off your clothes. Well,
And then you go,
the other thing is that when you're in a fitting, when you're dealing with the actor or the actress, they're also looking at the mirror, and who knows what they're looking at. I mean, they may be looking at very different things. I've had conversations with actors in fittings about the fact that, are we talking about the actor or are we talking about the character? And to help them make that distinction as well. I know that that's a very important thing to deal with. I mean, as you're saying, my mother told me my earlobes were too
Yes.
big or whatever, or you have to cover this up. And
If you can find the thing that makes them comfortable, that's the magic moment. I remember Jacqueline Bisset on a movie we were working on saying, everybody in Hollywood is always appalled at the size of my shoulders. What are we going to do about my shoulders? I said, could we start out by celebrating them?
I
She
should say
burst into tears.
go over and kiss them. That's what I would do.
Yeah. So we did. We celebrated them and we showed them off.
Oh, good.
But you were really the foundation for the actors.
Well,
It begins in front of the mirror in the fitting room, in the underwear, the silk underwear.
But do you show actors sketches before they're even built?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, you want their
yeah.
input. Oh, yes.
Before, but
the
often
more
before you
include.
design it, is that the thing of
good actors
talking
tend to
them.
be really smart about
Yeah.
Absolutely.
costume,
Yeah.
too.
They've studied the characters. The characters probably as long as you have, if not
Yes.
longer.
I think one of the most rewarding things is I've done a lot of work at the Royal Shakespeare Company where we have sometimes like an 18-week rehearsal period, which is joyous because you can. I mean, often I haven't designed the costumes till halfway through that. They've been rehearsing for 8 or 9 weeks. They know exactly
They know
what they
what-
are. They know that character inside out, and they help design the costume.
Yeah.
You know, and
State
you get the
supported
best.
arts over there.
You get the best costume because you're designing for that character, and they know that character. Rather than, as often happens with a short rehearsal period, the costumes have to be designed because they have to be started, and the actors arrive and they're presented with this thing that's half built.
But you
and it's-
still
and it never-
exclude
it
the
doesn't
actor
work.
at your peril.
Right.
It
must be
doesn't
included.
work. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Must be included.
All right, well, I think we're going to take a little break now, and then we'll come back, and after everybody stretches, and we'll have a few more conversation, questions, perhaps. 18 weeks. I want to go there.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theatre Wing's Working in the Theatre seminar on designers. Before returning to it, I would like to emphasize that even though these seminars and the annual Tony Awards given for excellence in theatre are the most visible of our activities, they are only a small part of the work we do for the community. As a long-established charity, we serve both theatre and the community with our year-round programs. The Wing works to develop new audiences for theatre and for a broadening of young minds. We bring the magic of theatre to those who otherwise not know its power. Programs for students include Introduction to Broadway, which in its 10-year history has enabled almost 100,000 high school students to come to the theatre, many for the first time. The Wing also introduces young people to theatre by bringing professionals into schools for workshops as a part of our Theatre in School program. Additionally, with our hospital program, dating back to World War II, when the wing created the legendary stage door canteens. We continue to entertain patients in hospitals, nursing homes, AIDS centers, and child care facilities in the New York area. With volunteer talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world, we bring live entertainment, hope, and joy to those who are not able to get out and attend theater. Our grants and scholarship program provides essential funding where it is so needed today to help launch new productions in the not-for-profit world. We take pride in the work we do and remain so grateful to our members and everyone whose contributions make the work of the American Theatre Wing possible. Our work strengthens the community, and it strengthens the community between the theater and the community, and we are proud to be a part of this very great effort. And now I would like to go back to our moderator, Ken Billington.
Thank you. I wanted to start this section. I don't want to pit one side against the other, but I want to ask the costume and set designers, when obviously part of what you have to deal with the lighting designer is the expectation of illuminating that which you have designed. But what expectations do you have of a lighting designer?
They better make it look good.
Well, they're always ruining my color palette.
Sometimes they save the day.
Yeah. Well, the first thing,
across the...
it's the only seriously gigantic new thing that's happened to theatre in God knows how many thousand years. So we should be seriously grateful for it. But the thing that surprises me is how a lighting designer, in addition to making what we do selectively visible in the way that you dream it might happen, is that they can also I've seen it happen where they can literally make chunks of a show better than they have been. There was an instance on a musical a few years ago where there was a wonderful production number that got a pretty good response every night. And then the lighting designer decided to have a go at it and put a series of cues in throughout the number that heightened the excitement radically, step by step through the number, until literally after he'd worked on one afternoon on this, this number got a standing, screaming response and was then the number that was used on the Tony Award show and was the sort of icon for this show.
Tony, I do think that, I know that Ken, because Ken does this very well, that numbers, that musical numbers particularly, really can be engineered.
Yes.
They can be simply engineered to deliver by their lighting.
Right.
And it's such a you would think a subtle thing for an audience to be perceiving, but it's not. It's a really visceral thing, and it can really get your heart rate going.
Yes.
You
Do
know?
choreographers have a tendency to understand that, or do you have to do this?
Some do and some don't. You know, they always want to focus on something that maybe doesn't need to be focused on. They're so worried about the handkerchief in the pocket, you know, and you make that, or not isolating enough, or all that. But they have spent so long up here and in the studio coming up with whatever that number is. In the same way they work with the orchestrator and the dance music arranger and the scenic and the costume designer. I get to it last, you know. The designers, the scenic and costume, have been working on it for a long time. Not that I haven't, but all of a sudden we are now sitting in a theater and we have 1 hour to do a number. And everyone else has spent months on it, and they've had 6 weeks in the rehearsal hall, and I now get 1 hour to finish the number. And you hope you don't destroy the number. But many times I will also talk to the orchestrator, because you'll say, you know, if you give me a little something here, that will motivate the light changing, or you give me a harp gliss, then I can do down with the lights. All to orchestrate this entire piece to being
and you're
interesting and helping the show work.
And you're also dealing with making the costumes be what they need to be, and making the scenery it would look as whatever it's going to be, and it might be a very changeable kind of thing. It's not that it has to look good, but that it might look one thing or then another thing or then another thing, as well as the musical dance beats that you're dealing with.
Do you actually sketch with lighting in mind?
I do. I do very much, and I taught a little bit. Last year I assisted Ming-Cho Lee teaching up at Yale, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be teaching this spring at NYU a bit. And with students, I'm always trying to say, you know, one thing you must be very, very, very interested in designing your scenery is what it might look like with light and how that light's going to get to it. Because from where? Because if the light can't get to it, it's not going to look that good.
That solid ceiling.
That solid ceiling is not going to help you. And the also how the space might be informed by whatever kind of light. And I often do actually kind of just crummy little quick light sketches, nothing elaborate, but little light sketches.
So your sketches have a lot of lighting in them.
I try. Well, actually, I'm the magical Ming-Cho Lee, who you've both mentioned, than whom there is nobody more wonderful, rather disapproves of working on black paper, and teaches his students not to.
He says it's like Elvis painting.
Yes,
but it's not.
But in fact, you know,
really
that's what you're
lights.
doing in the theater. Is you're selecting what the audience is going to see out of the darkness. So I, for me, find it very often, if it's an appropriate kind of show to do that with, to start out with a dark background,
or
and gradually
even
bring it
to
life.
take a sketch that you have of a scene or a photograph of a model. Photography's gotten so slick now. I'm sure you do this all the time, that you take digitals of the model and then do stuff, and then take a piece of trace and just do little quick lighting sketches over those photographs or those original sketches, just to get a sense of what might happen.
I like them. I love seeing what the set designer was thinking. You know, I used to work a lot with Oliver Smith, and Oliver Smith used to show all of the lighting in his sketches. And I would sit there, and when he presented it to everybody, this is what it better look like, you know. And if he had the sunlight coming from stage right, I better have the sunlight coming from stage right and not stage left. I always find it helpful. I don't want it to totally tell me how to design the show, but I always think a little bit of light in there is always good for everybody. It also makes it a more interesting picture.
And do you find more and more that you're invited to meetings with the director and designer at a much earlier stage than at one time you might have been? Because I really enjoy that.
Actually, it depends who you work with. I have done shows where I've been hired first.
Right.
And then the rest of the team has been brought in. I have done a lot of shows. When I work with David Mitchell a lot, I'm there from his first meeting with everybody.
See, I really value that.
And
I enjoy that a lot
like that
because it actually will design a set around.
We're all in it together.
Yeah.
You know,
We have to do it,
I always think when you walk out of the theater at the end of the evening, you should come out having said it's a great show. You shouldn't come out saying, "God, the show was good," and that scenery and you have to come out having had the perfect theatrical experience. I love getting reviews, and John Simon has a paper bag over my head a few times, but I just think, you know, I think no review is the good review. Yeah. When they review the play and they say the play worked, I think then I did my job well. I mean, it doesn't help me in the publicity department, but it helps me as an artist think I did okay.
I remember as a student being constantly told by a wonderful British designer called Jocelyn Herbert, who always said, if the show begins, if there was a curtain in a production, if it goes out and the audience applaud the set, you've gone too far.
Yes.
Right. And that was drummed into us all the time.
I wanted to ask you, in Contact, there's a yellow dress. Now, I imagine that when you designed that yellow dress, you wanted it to look right.
It was a different yellow when I first designed it.
Well, it didn't have sparkles. Didn't it have little sparkly things in it by the end?
I had to fight back on that one.
There were 13 yellow dresses.
9 yellow dresses, all different shapes and sizes and all different cuts.
And colors?
And colors.
Different shades of yellow?
I began the process with the fabulous Deborah Yates, who came from nowhere into all of our lives. And I was the one who had to break the news to her that you have to wear yellow. Well, tears before bedtime, you know, because she was a blonde, and blondes don't normally wake up and say, I'm going to put yellow on.
Because it conflicts with the hair?
Well, it bounces onto the face. The yellow is is a tricky color for most
And it was
people.
very important to the writer, and
because
the director, because it was it was a totemic thing in their head that this girl was
Wear
in
yellow.
that this character was a girl in yellow, this iconic
So that
girl.
was built into it. So after the tears, I took her to Barbara Matera's, and we put layer on layer of yellow on her until she started. I watched her body language, and when she finally smiled, I realized that was the right yellow. That was all very well and good, and we made the first, number 1 out of 9, and we took the Lois Greenfeld's photographs, and it's on the buses and taxis, and everything is fine.
That's number 1.
That's number 1. But then you get on stage, and the lighting is this close. It's right, like, what is that, 9 feet, 6 feet, something like this?
14.
Well,
in the Mitzi New House, it was only about a foot above
a
there.
foot above, exactly. So a foot away is like 1,000,000 megawatts of color. So, of course, that yellow became pure white in about a second. And then I had to, and they wanted it like that. So I just cut off the outer layer with scissors in the corner, more tears. And underneath there was a bounce layer that was a richer, deeper yellow. And she went back out, as I said, more tears, and, what are you doing to me? And all of a sudden, we were getting closer to the yellow instantly. And that proceeded, and I kept making dress after dress of different yellows, because it was very saturated production. And when she would go off stage and wear this yellow, it was horrifying to her because it was not the right color. It was only when it was on stage under those saturated light that we got the right yellow for her complexion and for the man.
The other thing with that, William, was that it seems to me that dress, it was a very important dress because it was a centerpiece of that show. And we worked on many things on the show, and that the girl has an incredible amount of very difficult dance to do. So that dress, the way that lighting can engineer a number, those costumes and that costume are engineered, literally engineered for dance, that she can be lifted, that it can then fall correctly.
There's more substructure to that simple slip dress
boy.
you even want to know about. But finally, the final dress number 9, which is the one that we're still adapting actually to each actress. I shift it slightly to their bodies. But I found a fabric that had appliqué, it's called cracked ice on a slinky jersey. And the cracked ice catches the light and sends it off. So it has more magic. It also scrapes her partners dreadfully. So we had to add long sleeve shirts for several of the lifts. But it's wonderful for the lights.
And you brought lots of material so you can keep building the dress.
That's right. That's right. We have lots and lots. But there's tears from the partners because it scrapes them, if they slide down their body. But now they wear long sleeve shirts when they're partnering certain moves. But so that was me. So not only did I increase the saturation of the yellow to deal with the lighting, but I also added sparkle to the fabric to help give a better palette for the light.
And it's just a simple yellow dress, and who would have known?
But that shows such a great collaboration with you and lighting and everything, because even throughout the show, the yellow dress becomes magic, and then
it goes away.
And then it goes away, and that's all the lighting, and that's
That's
just a brilliant collaboration.
So it comes and goes.
That's great.
Good choice of.
Good question.
Good
Finally,
question. You got it finally.
we have some questions. We'll see how good these are from the audience now.
Good afternoon. My name is Vic Spira. I'm a retired drama teacher from Queens. Can I thank you all for making this one of the most enjoyable afternoons I've ever had in my life.
Thank you.
My question is directed toward David. Were the costumes in Rocky Horror Show described by the author or director, or are they yours?
As we've been saying, it's a collaboration, and Christopher Ashley, the director of the show, and I worked very much on bringing the show to a modern viewpoint. The show is not saddled, but also brings with it what everyone's imagination of Rocky is from the movie that everyone has seen 20,000 times. And so we wanted to respect that and bring part of that to it. But more it was about taking the germ, the seed of that, and bringing it forward and bringing it into the modern day.
David,
If that answers.
I wanted to ask also, the set designer was David Rockwell, who I don't believe had ever designed a set before. He's a wonderful interior designer.
Yeah, yes.
Did he have specific ideas about the costumes, or was he?
No, actually not. I mean, it was very much he was creating the environment and did brilliant work, I think, on making that more than theater. It's just, I mean, it's a space, it's a ride that you're going on in that piece, and that's why the whole thing flips over, the stage flips over. But as far as getting into the world of it, I mean, he is establishing the world of the red that we're using in that show, and several of the qualities of the blackness and where that world is sitting, and how the people will be seen on it. But as far as, I think that the lab should all be set up this way, and you should be doing this with the costumes, that was not really what David was interested in.
Okay. Another question?
Hi, my name is Kim Corbett, and this audience question is, when doing a Broadway show, when are you hired and by whom?
Name anyone.
It can be the director the general manager calls up and negotiates your money, but it could be the director who would like you. It could be the scenic designer. It could be the producer. It could be the general manager. It could be the author who has a relationship with you, that you're part of a team. We all have directors and designers we work with all the time. We change, but that happens a lot. And that's how you get the job. And then once you're there, the money part of it is handled by the general manager and your agent or attorney. And you're hired. So I've been hired 3 weeks in advance, and I've been hired 3 years in advance.
And you are essentially hired by the producer. It's the producer who's doing the hiring.
But
that's
the director.
But it's the director
Let us all make this very clear. There is only one boss in the Broadway theater
when you're
world,
working on the
and
stage.
it is the director.
Right.
But film is different. It's the producer there. But on Broadway, it's the director, and you stray at your peril.
But when you have a costume design that you give to your director, and it's going to be very expensive to make and doesn't fit into the budget, who tells you?
Tish.
You're not going to make the poor manager.
So easily said.
Next question.
I'm not doing well with you, William. Yes, next question.
Hi, my name is Melanie Smock, and my colleagues Kim Corbett and Ken Armour and I have kind of a group question for the entire panel, which is, do any of you need an assistant?
You know, the assistant question, if I could jump in on that. I worked after school. I worked as an assistant for a few years to various people, including Santo and including Robin Wagner. And working as an assistant is a very different experience than being in school. And it's a hugely beneficial training experience, I think. You learn, it's the first time that you're around shows with big resources. And you learn how those shows get done, and you learn what becomes important and what isn't important, whereas how a molding on the edge of a table might be very, very, very important in a small off-Broadway house or a regional theater where you're right up close to a stage. That's not going to be important when you have $500,000 worth of scenery moving around so fast you can't even see the table come and go. It's more important about getting the stuff to move. And these are things you don't learn really till you're out of school and working as an assistant. So I think all of us always need assistants. I think we could all say yes on that one.
Yeah.
I would add that, how do you get to be an assistant?
Well, is it Kim? Is that right?
22, actually.
Melanie, sorry. Yeah, really. To be an assistant, I think you just call. I remember I called Robin over and over and over, and finally he just gave in, and he said, "Oh,
bombard people with letters and phone calls."
Exactly. Yeah. Also, the intern system. If they're free, that's the best. And then you see if it works, and then you
an intern for the summer, an intern on a show. If you figure out how to do it.
How do you get that?
I get 2 or 3 resumes a day. and I talk to everybody. And sometimes I like the person or whatever, they have something they can give me, or it happens to be they got to my office the day I need somebody.
Yeah, sometimes.
Often it is literally that.
But sending a resume to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But are we assuming that these are people who have been to school, to drama school?
Some have, some haven't.
Not always.
Last year I had a high
I'm trying to
school
save you guys
intern,
from a lot of resumes.
Yeah,
That's how I started. Why not?
yeah, it is not always.
Democracy.
Sometimes it's been 3 years worth of graduate school, and those are the people you're seeing, and sometimes not, and it depends. Skill levels can come from anywhere.
I didn't go to school. I didn't go to college. I went from high school to being an assistant on Broadway. How I did that, God only knows. But I avoided that 6 years of spending a lot of money at school. So I learned by working on 30 Broadway shows as an assistant. And
There's nothing like that.
You know,
the best,
Nothing
the
to
best
replace
learning curve.
the hands-on.
thing.
Yeah.
But now, is there a school for lighting designers?
Sure, there's a great number. Yale,
Like
Carnegie
3 or 4.
Mellon,
Great
NYU, UCLA, Northwestern.
Northwestern's very good for lighting.
Yeah, and
Always has been.
that really they have facilities and they teach that and they put
And they
people
allow
together.
the students. I think importantly in those schools and many others that you just mentioned, they allow the students to be working with directors and with actors and with set designers or costume designers or vice versa on stage. Finally, working on a production, and that's very valuable as a student to be able to have work realized. Right. That's quite a valuable thing.
You know, often they just do it in a studio. You know, they sit and they draw the pretty pictures and say, "I'm going to light it this way," but they never get to turn a light on the red dress or the yellow dress to see what the light really will do to the red dress or the yellow dress or the green dress in the environment that's been created for the play. And schools that permit you to do that are really great.
One more question.
My name is Kenneth Armour, and this question is directed to everyone. How do you manage to create sets and lighting to work in multiple theaters for a road tour?
With great difficulty.
Yeah, very hard.
Yeah, you need assistance.
It's easier if it is a show that has been playing, that is an established New York show, then everyone knows what the needs are exactly, and then you can pare it down to go on the road. It's when you are going the other route, you're touring and then coming in. The thing to know about the road, 29 feet of depth is it. If you want a road show,
You have to go for the worst case theater depth. Most of them are many, many times larger than that, but you have to go for the worst one.
And in fact, most Broadway houses, 29 or 30 feet of depth is about what we've got.
Yeah.
So often the road houses, funnily enough, are bigger than the Broadway houses, but you do have to go for a
Oh,
minimum.
you're so spoiled out of town.
Exactly.
well, I always say the St. James Theater, which I believe is 28 feet 6 inches.
Where the producers is playing
where the
right
producers,
now.
But where the biggest musicals in the history of the theater have played in 29 feet of depth, which some people have bigger living rooms.
But one of the real problems with that, trying to make it work for a number of out-of-town theaters, is if you're starting out at a gigantic theater. A show that I was working on not long ago was to start out at the Dallas Music Fair, which I think is a 5,000, 6,000 seat theater, and was going to end via various other stops at a conventional Broadway stage. It's not just a design problem, it's a problem of how are you going to be arresting to 6,000 people? How broad are your gestures going to be? How loud is the sound going to have to be? And is that going to make a different show when you're actually creating the show first time out? And how hard is it going to be to bring that down to the size that the more intimate show that it needs to be in a more conventional Broadway musical
Whereas if it starts in a conventional house and then lands unhappily for 2 weeks in the 5,000-seat house, you think, well, I'm glad I'm not there for those 2 weeks. And then it moves on.
Well, I always think the people that see the
else.
show in the 5,000-seat theater are used to seeing shows in the 5,000-seat theater, so they don't know about the...
But it isn't just about the audience, it's about the show you make, because you make the show for the audience you've got. And I worked on a show, a Tommy Tune musical that didn't arrive in New York because he broke his ankle, but it got seriously damaged by playing very large. It was an intimate show, and it started out in an intimate theater, and it went bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just destroyed its essential nature. And it's a very tricky thing.
I've had the similar problem, but in reverse, because I'm doing a show here which originated in London, and we brought it over to Broadway, and it was designed for a very large theatre. It was at the National Theatre, and then it went from there into the West End, where we had to reduce it. And now bringing it over here, we've had to reduce it even more because of the depth thing.
Right.
And we needed twice the depth that we've actually got. But everyone said to me, but the show's got to be exactly the same. I don't want to change it. And we've hung on to that, but interestingly, I had to break the proscenium line. So we built out through the proscenium. We took away 2 rows of seat with huge arguments with producers, but we won that battle. But ironically, the show's now better than it's ever been because it's in the audience's face.
Yes.
So that's one example when it's worked in our favour. And that's rare, but it has.
That's great. Well, I think it's time to wrap this up. We could go on all afternoon, but I'd like to
Well,
thank the
any
panel.
more questions to ask?
Well, you have to wait till next time. Isn't it? But anyway, I'd like to thank the panel very much, and thank you all for being here. This is the American Theatre Wing Seminars, Working in the Theatre. This was on designers.